Bogbean is one of the loveliest and most unusual of our wildflowers. Loveliest for obvious reasons, but unusual because in no other wildflower are the petals covered with longish white hairs, which are not really hairs but tentacle-like extensions of the petal surface itself. Bogbean is widespread throughout Europe, North America and Asia, where it grows in fens, bogs and marshes. But with the disappearance of the bogs here in Ireland, it's nothing like as common and widespread as it once was. It's a perennial. It spreads through its pool by means of shallow rhizomes that are honeycombed with air pockets to enable them to breed under such conditions. It's the only species in its genus. The genus is Menianthes, one of only 5 genera in a small family of no more than 40 species allied to the gentians. Bogbean is unusual in that it is a classic example of a flower that exhibits floral dimorphism, which is where there are 2 forms of the flower, and on any one plant all the flowers will be one or other of these forms. But the flowers of either of the 2 forms can only be fertilized by pollen from the other form. The flower has 5 petals, united to form a nectar-filled flask at the base, and 5 sepals also united towards the base. There are 5 arrow-like stamens, which alternate with the corolla lobes to which the filaments are fused. There are 2 carpels, which have fused to form a single-chambered ovary, surmounted by a long style that ends in a 2-lobed stigma. In one form of the flower, the 5 stamens are right at the top of the corolla flask, and the short style and a very prominent stigma are near the bottom. In the other form, the long style and stigma reach right to the top, and the stamens are fused to the lobes of the corolla near the base. In long-styled flowers, the visiting insect comes in contact immediately with the stigma, depositing any pollen it may already have on its body with it. The best way to see this is to look at a cross-section of the flower. Here is a long-styled flower with the stamens halfway down the corolla tube and the stigma right at the top. And here is a short-styled flower with the stamens at the top. The hairy surface of the petals makes it difficult for a visiting insect to land on them, so they have to alight in the centre of the flower, where they are covered on arrival with pollen in short-styled flowers because the anthers dehiss inwards. Insects visiting the 2 forms of the flower are likely to pick up most pollen on a different part of their body at each of the 2, and to subsequently transfer most of the pollen to a flower where the stigma is at the same level as the stamens from which the pollen came. In other words, the pollen deposited on a long-styled flower is more likely to have come from stamens of a short-styled flower, and vice versa. There are also differences in the size of the stigmas, the anthers, and the pollen grains between the 2 forms, all of which seem to affect compatibility between them. The common name Bogbean is really self-explanatory because of the habitat of the plant. The bean part reflecting the leaves, which are quite like the leaves of broad bean. The scientific name is Menianthes trifoliata. The trifoliata means trefoil, which again is describing the bean-shaped leaves. But the generic name Menianthes comes from the Latin word mensis, which means a month, from which our word menstruation also comes. And the connection between the 2 is that Bogbean was once used to treat menstrual disorders. But it had a very wide range of other uses right across its extensive range, among which was that it was used to treat a condition known as ague, which was a mild form of malaria that occurred very widely. And Bogbean was used to treat this condition, and there were some people at the time who thought that there was a providential arrangement here, that God had disposed of this plant for use in the very same place that this condition, this ague, was prevalent. Bogbean has an intensely bitter taste, the rhizomes especially, and it was a main ingredient in various bitter-tasting alcoholic drinks like schnapps. And at one time it was used as a substitute for hops in beer making. People in the Arctic tundra, where the plant is widespread, made a bitter sort of bread from the rhizomes. And finally, there's one other detail I cannot resist telling you, and that is that there is a chemical in Bogbean called Mitsugashi walactone, and this is attractive to cats. And if you're wondering how such an outlandish name could be given to a chemical, I can tell you that this particular chemical was originally isolated and synthesized in Japan. And the Japanese word for Bogbean is Mitsugashiwa.